Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two very special guests. They've just worked together and published a book. If you're watching this on YouTube, Rumble, X, Substack now, you'll see the cover of their excellent book. The full title is Killing the Lieutenant, Fighting Miami's Cocaine Wars, Hunting Griselda Blanco in My Fight to Stay Alive. And it's written by Lieutenant Raul J. Diaz, and he is co-author is Sean Oliver. And I actually saw Sean's name pop up earlier about this book, Monkey Morales. I saw him on interviews. So when I was opened this book, I was pleasantly surprised to see that he was the author of that as well. I kind of made the connection. And he's mentioned in this book. There's a lot of very interesting first-person accounts in this book of Lieutenant Diaz's life in Miami as somebody who fled Cuba. And we're talking in the pre-show. It's actually current today because I think it was Raul Castro, I think is his name. I can't remember his first name, but he was indicted, I think today or yesterday, which we're talking about. And they can add more to that and talk about that. But there's a lot in this book. It's a great account of growing up in Miami at that time. There's a lot going on in Miami that has led into common culture, the anti-Castro Cubans, things that happened around Kennedy that he can talk more about. They both can talk more about. So Sean Oliver and Raul Diaz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Happy to be here.
Great. So for people who may not have heard your name, like I was somewhat familiar with you, Sean, and also Lieutenant, maybe you can talk about the genesis of this book, how it came together, how you worked together, and how you put together this book, Killing the Lieutenant.
I was interviewed by Sean several years ago when he was starting to work on the Monkey Morales book. And I like his style. I like the way he conducted the interviews. And I read a draft of the book and I really liked his style writing too. So after he finished that book, I asked him if he would write a book with me. And that's how I met Mr. Oliver here.
And this is recently published, at least on Amazon. The publication date was, I think it was just April. Yeah. So not just within the last month.
Yeah. So in retrospect, I should have held out a little longer. I agreed rather quickly. Hello, Johnny. Welcome. I should have held out a little more, made Raul work a little more for my attention and love. But I caved. I made the mistake of caving because of my excitement. You know, there's a phrase when I talk to people about storytelling, whether in film or in book form, not every great story is a great book, and you could even have a series of great stories that don't necessarily have the arc that you need to have a great book. But I suspected that this would be a great book. So I was pretty excited right away to get started on it. And as we rolled through it about halfway, I realized, or I was able to tap into, I should say, the human element of it. I mean, the super cop stuff is great and it's exciting, and who doesn't love a little Miami cocaine in their story from the 70s and 80s? Miami Vice was the biggest story on TV. Cocaine Cowboys was the biggest documentary on Netflix forever. Griselda was just a big hit on Netflix. But beyond the fantastical, wild excitement, I knew there was a human being whose toll in going through that and fighting that, being charged with fighting that, and heading the task force that was spotlit in a very bright spotlight in law enforcement, CENTAC 26, to do that. I knew the human story of that person's life and the people around him who were hit with the shrapnel of a life like that. I knew that was going to be the kind of the heart of the story.
Got that. And it is an interesting story. Like the arc of your life, Raul, is very fascinating. I mean, you were in Cuba, and so you were part of these people who had to flee to the United States, kind of for their safety. I mean, according to your mom, like, it seemed like she was always worried, like, of people being spied on or something like that. So it sounds like you were fortunate to make it to Florida. Is that correct?
I'm having a problem hearing.
Okay. I'll need to speak up. I was just saying that you're kind of like you have a history with Cuba and you were lucky to flee and come to the United States at an early age, right?
My brother and I were both very fortunate to be able to leave Cuba in 1961 because after that it became almost impossible. It was very, very hard. That's why you had people leaving in boats and rafts and stuff. But we came via the Pedro Pan operation, which was an operation put together by the Catholic diocese in Miami. And they got 14,000 of us out between 61 and 65, I think. So we were fortunate also in that my aunt and uncle were here in Miami, and so we went to their home, but many of those 14,000 kids didn't have any relatives here, so they went to foster homes, Catholic foster homes all over the United States, and those kids really had they went through a more traumatic things than my brother and I did because many of these kids were born with platinum spoons, not with silver spoons. And all of a sudden, they find themselves in a foreign country with a foreign language and a foreign culture, and they don't have one penny to their names. And so many had problems, but the majority overcame it, and it resulted in having been a very good group of people for the United States to receive. Uh, I was very lucky that my brother and I grew up in Miami Beach, and we were poor, but we didn't know it because, at nights we were allowed to have bonfires on the beach. We'd take our transistor radios and light a bonfire and drink our Cokes and have a great time. So we were poor and we didn't know it. Yeah.
So you had to adapt to the U.S. I assume that you didn't know much English when you first made it to Florida in '61. Is that right?
No, I knew in Cuba, in our school, La Salle, it was a Catholic school, private Catholic school. We were taught English 1 hour a day, every day from first grade on. So most of us who got here had a very good understanding. We understood English perfectly. It was harder to speak it, but we knew English. So the getting rid of the accent was the only thing we needed to do, and we did.
And you worked odd jobs kind of through high school, working your way up to eventually joining law enforcement. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I had to help my parents because there were four of us. They just got here. Jobs were not paying a lot, so I went and I got a job. I learned to work the pool, with my friends, and I went on my own and I got a job at the Delmonico Hotel and the Casablanca hotels right on Collins Avenue on the ocean. And I got my first boss, the guy at the Casablanca Hotel, was at the Delmonico Hotel, was Murph the Surf, and the guy next door was Roger Clark. So those two guys and Alan Kuhn were guys that we spent a lot of afternoons with, just after we finished cleaning the pools and stuff. I learned to surf from Murph the Surf. Yeah.
So, and he went on to he became a jewel thief. He had a very colorful life before he was arrested, right?
The three of them, when after work, they used to walk, maybe half a block to the Sherry Frontenac Hotel. And they used to go up to the roof. I used to climb down the walls, then go back up. And I guess they were practicing for their thing to come in October '94. Yeah.
Right. So that was it. They were like jewel thieves. Like
They were.
I think
Yeah,
they stole
they were very good jewel thieves.
They stole
And,
the
Murphy
Star
Surf
of
was a
India
genius.
sapphire, I think, right? That was
The Star of India sapphire was a priceless stone. They got away with that and some other stuff too in a very in a heist made for Hollywood. I mean, they like rappelled in and they used like cutters to go through the glass. It was a pretty sophisticated operation.
It was.
With their training down at Raul's job, his first job. Were you dancing flamenco? What was your job down there, Raul?
Where in the hotel?
At the hotel, you were a dancer at the hotel, or
Not a dancer.
a pool boy. I'm sorry, I got you confused with your later career.
Yeah, in the mornings we get and set up the pool. We get the mats out, get the towels out, put the towels on the mats, and line up all the lounges, and then go to school. In the afternoon, we'd come by and pick up all the towels, take them to the laundry, pick up all the mats, stack them up, cover them, and hose down the floor by the pool, the deck.
Well, I'd rather be flamenco dancing, hearing all that. To be honest with you.
But you're right there in that environment in the '60s, kind of, and there's a lot of like kind of mob figures around. Like you mentioned, Lefty Rosenthal. So there's that undercurrent of kind of mob activity is there. Would you agree with that?
In Miami Beach, I lived on 82nd Street, on 81st and Hawthorne, 1 block away from my house, lived Peanut Stranolone, an identified lieutenant in the Centro Traficante family in Cuba. And across the canal from him was Chiqui Chirico, Joseph Chirico, who was another identified member of the. I mean, there were a lot of Jewish and Italian organized crime people living in Miami Beach in those days.
Well, your girlfriend, who later becomes your first wife, Tanya, her mom is working at a store that's owned by an associate of Meyer Lansky, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So these are all the people like that had investments in Cuba when Castro took over too, right?
Oh, yes, they did. Several of these guys that would live there were partners with either Santo Traficante or Meyer Lansky in the casinos in Cuba.
Right. So they weren't happy. So and there's also that's kind of when the anti-Castro Cubans kind of came together as a social and political bloc. Would you agree with that?
Well, I know that I don't know how many committees looked into the possibility of the mafia having been involved in the murder of John F. Kennedy for that same reason, because some people were hopeful that the invasion would take over people, that the invasion would be successful and they would be able to go back to Cuba. But Kennedy was blamed for not sending air support. And as a result, the invasion failed. And so there was no return to the casinos.
But you knew some of the people like that were arrested for the Bay of Pigs. And so like these are close kind of within your social circle too. So that was in the environment that you grew up with a lot of people.
I don't know who was arrested for the Bay of Pigs, but I mean, my father-in-law was a member of the CIA when Bay of Pigs took place, and I had my uncle was murdered by Castro 3 days after the invasion. So yeah, I had family involved in the Bay of Pigs.
And you also have a kind of connection not only to Murph the Surf, but H. Howard Hunt, who was around South Miami at that time, is my understanding. Is that right?
Well, E. Howard Hunt was my father-in-law's boss during the invasion. And he was also my father-in-law's boss when they were caught inside Watergate.
So a lot of the anti-Castro Cubans were pretty tough characters. Like a lot of had special skills, is a way to put it. Would you agree with that?
Yes, there. Those who were involved in the Bay of Pigs there were those who were, who were trained as just infantry, but there were others who received special training in surveillance, counter surveillance, intelligence, counterintelligence, bomb making. Uh, so and these people then were just left in Miami, no jobs. All of a sudden, thousands of people.
Right. So that made it even more interesting. So you have the mob, you have anti-Castro Cubans, and you grew up in that. And how did you make your way into law enforcement?
I went on a vacation in 1967. It was supposed to be a surf ferry up the East Coast. Myself and two friends of mine, and I had just changed my my major in college from accounting to criminology. So we went up to New York and we found a perfect wave in Ocean City, New Jersey. It was the summer of the perfect summer movie, the endless summer,
Endless summer.
and yeah, and I got a call from one of the guys in our gang, our club, and he told me that one of the guys with me was planning on bringing several hundred hits of LSD hidden in my car. My car was my parents' car. So if for some reason we got stopped and arrested, our car would be lost. My parents would have no car. And that really pissed me off, that my friends would jeopardize losing my parents' car. So we came back that same evening. It was supposed to be another week, and I just turned south and didn't stop driving until I got to Miami. So after this, I started doing an internship in Miami Beach Police Department as part of my college education. It was an internship that paid and also gave us uh, credit for working for the Miami Beach Police Department. I met the narcotics lieutenant, and I told him about problems I was having with guys in my club purchasing drugs and stuff. And he asked me if I could make a control buy. I had no idea what a control buy was then, but then I learned and I said, yeah, I could do that. So September 20, 1967, I made my first buy of marijuana. I bought a whole ounce. Okay. Today, you find a guy with an ounce of marijuana, you just throw it away or flush it down the toilet or something. But then, and then after that, I set these guys up to deliver 2 pounds of marijuana to me. I made the buy, and believe it or not, these guys did 5 years for 1 pound of marijuana back in 1967. Um, I'm not proud of that, but it's the way it happened. And then I got a taste for law enforcement while I was doing this. I got to meet a lot of the guys in it. They were very nice guys. They treated me great. And when I got my degree, I applied for Miami-Dade Police Department. I did try for Miami Beach because there was a lot of corruption there for a while there, especially in those years. The guy that Sean talked about, that was my mother's boss, my mother-in-law's boss. I purposely, I did not pass the Miami Beach test. I know that I didn't answer half of the questions. Okay. So I know that at the most I would have gotten like a 58 score. So I went, took a Metro exam and I got an 89. So I passed Metro and then the night that I get my notice from Metro that I passed an 89, I get a call from my mother-in-law's boss congratulating me for passing the Miami Beach test. And I said, I'm sorry, but I got the notice that I didn't pass. I got 58. He said, no. That's completely wrong. They made a mistake. I spoke with the chief and you passed. You got like a 90 in the test and you're able to go to Miami Beach Police. I said, this is incredible. If I was worried about corruption, this showed me right there, right away, that there was a serious problem. And so I went on with Metro, and I think it was the best decision I made at the time.
And it kind of Miami, even at that time, kind of had a more Wild West, maybe loose, kind of like the law enforcement seemed maybe not as formal as it is now. Would you agree with that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Well, I was just saying it seemed like from the stories you told with your colleagues, you guys got away with some stuff that may not be acceptable in today's law enforcement. Would you agree with that?
The tactics,
maybe
aggressive tactics, we could say. Well, you got to understand what Raul will tell you firsthand what he was up against in the height of the cocaine wars when they were outgunned. This is when law enforcement down there wasn't authorized to carry even a semi-automatic weapon. They have revolvers, and they're up against these guys who we detail one account in the book where there were how many officers? 11 officers.
Yeah, there were 12 of us.
12 officers. You add up their 6 shooters, and then the one guy that they were after, Sepulveda, had what was it, a Mac 11, a Mac 10? He had something like 200 and some odd rounds.
Yeah. Pablo had a Mac 10 9mm with 120 rounds, a Mac 11, a 380 with 120 rounds, 240, and he had a Smith & Wesson Model 59, which is a 9mm with 28 rounds. So here you got this guy with 268 rounds, and the 12 of us, we had the 11 detectives in homicide had 66 rounds, and I had 14. So we had 80 among the 12 of us, and this guy had 268.
And that's one suspect. Forget about going into a house where there's 5 of them. So you ask a very important question. These tactics that we had, remember the tactics that we knew, and we have been trained, and these tactics that we learned during the academy and in schools and everything were tactics that were used to deal with a different enemy than we were facing. We were facing a new enemy. In these Colombian traffickers, they were unlike anything that had been seen in this country before, including the era of prohibition when they had all those shootings in the streets and all that. But those people never took it home. They didn't kill women and children. They didn't, go into their homes and just kill everybody around. In one case, we had 6 murder victims in one house. We had 4 guys and 2 women. And Griselda was pissed off because they left the baby alive.
When did the cocaine wars really start? Is it the mid-70s or earlier than that?
It started in late 70s. It started sometime around 78. It's when we started noticing the spike in Latin narcotics-related homicides. And then in 79, we had Dateland Shopping Center, that shooting in the shopping center where 2 guys went in with machine guns inside the Crown Liquors at, in the middle of the afternoons with women and kids around the parking lot and parking and walking to the shopping center. And these guys came in and shot two guys down with 2 machine guns, and then came out and sprayed the parking lot. Then they got in their van, went around the parking lot, and left the van. And when we looked at the van, here you had a war wagon, because it was a step-up van that had been, they had placed 1/4-inch stainless steel sheets around the sides of the van, and then stapled or nailed body armor to the to the door so it could fold and open and close. Okay, and inside that van, we found 14 weapons. So here we have a van that is made, in my opinion, it was made to kill police officers. If we tried to stop that van transporting drugs or narcotics, and the fact that they left the van with all those weapons there, it showed us that we're dealing with a different group of people that we were used to dealing with.
And there was also there was a spike in violence, much like what happened in South Central and Los Angeles too, right?
There was incredible amount. Listen, we didn't have the 24 hours or 48 hours, or that everybody's seen. Oh, you got to solve a homicide in 24 hours, or we got this show 48 hours. We didn't have that because we caught a homicide on Monday, and we caught a homicide on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, and then Thursday, and then Friday, and Saturday, and Sunday. Every day, we caught a homicide in Miami in 79, 80, 81, 82. So it was impossible.
Yeah, it was a war zone. It was basically kind of become a war zone. But there was also a lot of cocaine money floating around South Florida at that time too, as well, right?
That exacerbates the problem because you've got the first wave of smuggling in Florida through their extensive waterways and shorelines in South Florida. You've got the pot smugglers, and they're bringing up marijuana, flying up marijuana, bringing it up on the in the boats in very sizable amounts, the weight that they'd have to stack. Then they find that when the Cubans are the couriers for the Colombians to get the cocaine here, eventually the Colombians figure out, well, like any good business, let's cut out the middleman. This becomes much more economical. We'll just bring it ourselves. But it was exponential, the amount of money when they went to cocaine. That jump from the pot smuggling to the coke smuggling, just because of how valuable it was and the size. What you could bring. What were kilos going for at the time, Raul?
50,000.
Yeah, versus having to put 2,000 and 3,000 pounds of pot on a plane. So now it becomes much more violent because there's so much more at stake. The Colombians' tactics, like Raul said, there was a time when family was off limits, but no longer. When you get to 78, particularly 79, 80, in those years, when Raul goes to homicide, they're getting, Raul famously said, we didn't have whodunits, we had who is it's, because right. the bodies that they're picking up have all false identifications. They're here illegally. They're the Colombians killing themselves in the streets. They can't be ID'd. So the medical examiner, the coroner in Miami, has to rent at one point a Burger King refrigerated truck for the overflow of bodies because they're bursting at the seams in the morgue. How'd you like to have to walk into that and start closing homicides?
And that kind of corrupted a lot of law enforcement too, right? Wasn't there? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. There was corruption even in my department in 1979. The most experienced detectives in homicide got indicted, arrested, and tried, and many of them went to jail because they crossed the line. They crossed the line and started dealing with a Cuban cocaine smuggler, cocaine distributor, and they started ripping off cocaine and ripping off cash and working with this guy. And so they got caught. And that was the reason why I went up to homicide, because the morale in homicide had gone to hell. The guys that were left were embarrassed to even say they worked at Miami-Dade homicide. So I was sent to homicide not because of my experience in working homicide, but because of my management style. The major in charge of the Homicide Bureau thought that I would bring a lot of stuff to the homicide lieutenant's job that would be able to help them get their morale up and help them get their relationships with other federal and state uh, agencies, who had lost all those agencies had lost their faith in the homicide bureau because of the arrests that were made. So I was able to bring that back to the homicide bureau.
You had like Rick Morales, Monkey's son, who just popped up here a minute ago, and was reporting about when some of the officers in the was it the River Cops where they were working for the drug dealer and taking the coke from the crime scenes of other dealers and then giving it to.
That started with the cocaine cops, the homicide guys. That's it. When there was
in
a shootout,
70,
right? It's a shootout on US 1 right before Kendall, William, and when they stopped the car, they found a dead body in it and several kilos of cocaine. So the body went to the medical examiner. The kilos of cocaine went to the property room, and they were checked out one day for court. Except there was no court because the case never went any place. So they checked it out and checked it back in. Later on, when they looked at it, there was almost no coke left because it had been cut to a very low grade of cocaine. So somebody made with a lot of kilos of cocaine from that load alone.
And it wasn't there like a lot of money laundering and inflated land prices because they had to launder all that money too, right?
But they had no law there was no money laundering law until maybe 1987. They were the Federal Reserve Bank in Miami. What was it they had, Sean?
Yeah, they had more money than all 6 Federal Reserves in the country combined. Miami's boom in the 70s was absolutely financed by drug cash. And the law on the books was a banker wasn't supposed to process a transaction for monies gotten by illicit gains. Now, what banker is going to know for certain the cash cash was literally coming in contractor garbage bags. So, and what they said when asked about it was, we certainly wouldn't take any money, process any transactions, but it's impossible for them to know. So they always had that to lean on. He owns a construction. He said he owns a construction company. He gets paid in cash.
And as Ricky just pointed out, there was no forfeiture laws. Now it's hard for them to be able to launder all that money. I mean, Pablo Escobar, when at the end of his life and his career, he went to a lot of places where he had buried money and found that that it was rotten. He couldn't deal with it. He couldn't use it.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like he had like storage caches that had rotted away. Like,
yeah,
that's a tough problem to have. He couldn't launder his money, and there were a lot of people who were coming through Miami at that time. There was another guy. I mean, it was like a central node for coke trafficking in the U.S. Right? Would you agree with that? Yes.
Yeah. It was the first point of entry. You did have ships like the motherships that could hit several ports on the way up to like to Boston was one of the routes. You had some pilots that would fly it up if they get a plane large enough to hold enough fuel from their last reload in the Bahamas. they could get up and make drop-offs in Milwaukee or Boston. But yeah, I mean the majority of it was coming up through Florida, South Florida.
And then for people who don't know who Griselda is, can you talk a little bit about her, Griselda Blanco?
John?
Well, Griselda Blanco is a very fascinating character, even beyond some of the fictionalizing that Netflix did with her via Sofia Vergara's portrayal. Though Raul was portrayed very wonderfully by the equally as handsome Gabriel Sloyer. But she was fascinating because she was so well insulated from law enforcement, with so many layers between her and the street. Raul first hears the name, courtesy of Charlie Cecil, a DEA investigator who's at the homicide office after Dadeland, and they're just kind of commiserating and talking about it. And Charlie Cecil says, "Oh, this sounds like Griselda Blanco." And they kind of like, who? And so from his work in Medellin, he informs them who she is. So they get the name now. They're not able to ever charge her with anything, even though bodies are dropping all over the place in Miami at her hand or at her direction, until 1985. Ultimately, that charge doesn't even stick. That's thrown out of court in 86. But they go 6 years without ever being able to decisively pin anything on her, and it happens because her hitman finally flips. If that hadn't happened, I don't know if they ever would have gotten her. What do you think, Raul? What did you say?
No.
340 murders?
That's what we suspected her. But then again, we had really Ayala, the man who turned against her. We suspected him of. He pled to 29 murders, but we had him suspect of 41 murders. And our first target, when we had sent that going, was a man that we suspected of 21 murders, including 2 children in New York and 19 other people. And we thought he was bad. But then we started talking to the Pablo Melos and to Rivi Ayalas, and we found that hitmen for Griselda were known to have 150 hits, 200 hits. Chucho Castro, who was a man who was Griselda's number one hitman until she tried to kill him and killed his boy. But Chucho was suspected of a few until we found out who he really was, and then we realized that he would be suspected of having over 120 some people dead.
It's just incredible stuff. And she was in Colombia, right? She wasn't in the States, or
no, she was in the States.
Oh, she was.
Yeah, most of the time that this was going on, she was in Broward County in Fort Lauderdale.
But I mean, she's entered into legend as like rappers to sing about, and then you just mentioned she's on a Netflix show from 2024. It was just incredibly ruthless. Like she just was a serial killer or something. I don't know how else to explain it.
And she was lucky that she was ugly, because if she had looked like Sofia Vergara, then there were a lot more people would have been after her. I'll tell you that.
You also have to consider this is an industry dominated by men.
By bad men. Very bad men.
Yeah, the real deal. Think of how additionally ruthless you have to be as a lady to be taken seriously and feared by the other men in that industry.
Yep.
And she was.
And it was her that led to Centec 12, right? It was kind of her.
Yeah.
Is that right? It's 26. Sorry, Centec 26.
Yeah, it was. Centec 26 was what changed the game. I mean, the Colombian violators were used to facing police officers with 6-shooters, and we came out with fully automatic machine guns when we hit the streets. They were used to the regular ways of dealing with police officers, where they were arrested with a load, and they were arrested in charge, and then given a receipt for the load, and then they bound it out and they show the receipt to their boss, and everything would be all right. I changed that shit. I We started arresting some people, and we didn't put them in jail, and we didn't give them a receipt for the load. We put the receipt, we put the load in our property room. But when they would ask what was going to happen to them, and I would say nothing, go home, they would refuse to go home. And they would I mean, when I told them, you can leave now, you can leave my office, they wouldn't leave. They would stay sitting in my office because they didn't want to face their bosses and say, I got the 100 kilos I had. The police took them from me, but listen, they didn't arrest me, and they didn't give me a receipt. They knew they were dead.
Yeah.
So they started to cooperate a little more than they had done in the past. That changed. So when you asked the first question when we started this program, yes, we did act differently from other law enforcement departments or agencies, because we were facing these new criminals.
Like a new breed of ruthless criminals, yeah, with lots of money.
Yeah.
Really amazing. I mean, the stories are just amazing of what happened in Miami at that time.
And remember, William, 1980 crowned the era, because in 1980 we already had a very serious problem with the Colombian murders, and then we had the Mariel boat lift, and then in May of 1980 we had the Miami riots.
So you had there was race riots, right? Wasn't it a race riot?
Yeah.
Wow. Did you feel like
the Triple Crown?
The Triple Crown. Did you feel like the Muriel boat lift had a serious impact upon law enforcement there?
Boy. Listen, William, I came from Cuba, and I know a little bit about the Cuban government. I worked there also when I worked counterintelligence and counterterrorism. And you have to be a very bad guy to be a criminal in Cuba. Okay? Because they have no rights in Cuba. When they get arrested, they have no rights. They get the hell beaten out of them. Not only the day they arrest you, but just about every day in jail. And those guys were bad in Cuba. Then they come to this country. And when we arrest them, we tell them, you have the right to remain silent. You have to tell us anything. You have to, if you don't have a lawyer, we'll pay you for your lawyer. Then they go to jail, and they eat better in that jail than they did at home in Cuba. And so what were you going to threaten these people with? Right. In jail, they would go to a place where they were treated better than they were in the streets of Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
It was incredible. It was incredible. That's when the Burger King truck was hired by the medical examiners. And during the riots, listen, we'd have drivers that were caught on this side of the bay during the riot, and they were just stopped by the crowd and beaten to death. They were pulled out of their cars and beaten to death. We couldn't work a scene. We had to go there under guard. We'd have SWAT riding, and then we get to the scene, pick up the body, put it in the medical examiner's truck, and get the hell out of there, because we didn't want to die either. So we had no time to work the scene. We had those cases are still open.
When did you end up retiring?
September 1983.
So you went through that whole thing. Wow, that's incredible.
To say nothing of, it was heinous what you had to deal with on the street. But The end of Raul's career is actually it had less to do with these criminals on the street that we're talking about than it did with some of the skullduggery from within law enforcement and the media also. Some of the local media in Miami. I don't think it'd be a secret to anybody who's familiar in any industry. There's professional jealousies, but you could really tie up someone in law enforcement from the inside with investigations and having to answer charges and kind of putting their productivity on pause while they're investigated for all this. And Raul has just kind of had enough. And at the ripe old age of 33, while Santac 26 is actively cranking, he steps away. He says, I've had enough of this. They're going to tie me up forever. It's getting in the way of this operation. And for it to succeed, it's going to have to go on without me. And that was one of the tragedies.
Yeah, I imagine the stress on families and relationships and everything was just incredible, like a war zone, like you're in Nam or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
wow.
It was
Like,
terrible.
Just
It was
incredible
terrible.
stress. Yeah, I bet you were over at that bar drinking a lot, whatever that was, that one place, that watering hole you guys went to.
Ronnie's Lounge.
Ronnie's Lounge. yeah.
Ronnie's.
Guys, we are at the 45-minute mark. There's a lot more left in this book. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of details. So check it out. And here's the website, too, if you're watching or listening to this. It's killingthelieutenant.com. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap up the interview?
I appreciate your giving us the time to tell people about our book.
Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate that. Anything, Sean, you'd like to add?
Yeah, you could head to killingthelieutenant.com, check that out. The aforementioned monkeymorales.com is there too. And if you want to look at my shining face, it's at SeanOliverBooks.com. And keep listening to William Ramsey Investigates.
And
Obviously.
and William, I like to people who read this book to remember Miami was not always like that. It happened overnight, literally happened overnight in 1975. So this that happened to us could have happened any place else, and it still could happen any place else.
And is the website the best place to contact you guys? Or it's Killing the Lieutenant? Is there contact information on the bottom there? Or is there another place to...
At Sean Oliver Books, there's a contact button. They'll get it to me as long as it's filled with love and positivity.
Right. They usually are. Sometimes you get some... This is not your only book, like I
Oh,
mentioned.
yeah, the world is filled with love and positivity these days,
yeah,
William.
well. You've written books on Monkey Morales and Sink Clown Posse and other ones, Kayfabe, and some fiction too. So,
yeah.
Anyway, again, the book we talked about today is Killing the Lieutenant, Fighting Miami's Cocaine Wars, Hunting Griselda Blanco, and My Fight to Stay Alive. And the authors are Lieutenant Raul J. Diaz. Co-author is Sean Oliver. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, William. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay there. Stay there.